गिरिवरधारी जय गोपीचन वल्लभ गिरिवरधारी यशोदानंदन व्रजजन रंजन यशोदानंदन व्रजजन रंजन यमुना तीरा वनचारी यमुना तीरा वनचारी जय रात माधव कुंज बिहारी हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे जय प्रभुपादा जय प्रभुपादा श्रील प्रभुपादा जय प्रभुपादा जय प्रभुपादा श्रील प्रभुपादा जो विष्णुपाद बलवान सकर स्तोत्र सदस्य श्रीमती स्वयं श्री भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी शिल प्रभुपाद की जय। इस्कॉन संस्थापक शिल प्रभुपाद की जय। जीवम विष्णुपाद बलवान सकर स्तोत्र सदस्य श्रीमद भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी महाराज प्रभुपाद की जय। जीवम विष्णुपाद श्री गुरु किशोरदास बाबू महाराज की जय। जीवम विष्णुपाद सच्चिदानंद श्री भक्ति ठाकुर की जय। जीवम विष्णुपाद पर वैष्णव सरस्वती जगन्नाथ जय श्री रघुनाथ जी गोपाल भट्टदास अपना षट गोस्वामी प्रभु की जय। दास ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम से श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत साधु गौर की जय। श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोपी गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की जय। श्री श्री गौरांगी बेंगलोरेश्वर भगवान की जय। श्री श्री जगन्नाथ बलदेव सुभद्रा दर्शन भगवान की जय। श्री मायापुर धाम की जय। श्री वृंदावन धाम की जय। गंगा मई की जय। यमुना मई की जय। भक्ति देवी की जय। तुलसी देवी की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव की जय। श्री हरनाम संकीर्तन की जय। ग्रंथराज श्रीमद भागवतम की जय। इस्कॉन वर्तमान गुरुवंत की जय। समाज भक्त की जय। गौर प्रेमानंद हरि हरि बोल। ऑल glories to the assembly. All glories to the assembly. All glories to the assembly. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. All glories to Shri Prabhupada की जय। Krishna, welcome you all to this Friday morning Srimad Bhagavatam class. Today we are reading from Canto 3, Chapter 22, Text 32. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswati Vyasam Tato Jayamati Hriye Nashtaprayeshu Apatreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Sloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtihi Barhi Smatim Nama Vibhur Yam Nirvishya Samavasad Tasyam Pravishto Bhavanham Tapatreya Vinashanam Barhi Smatim Nama Vibhur Yam Nirvishya Samavasad Tasyam Pravishto Bhavanam Tapatre Vinashanam Barhi Smatim Nama Vibhur Yam Nirvishya Samavasad Tasyam Pravishto Bhavanam Tapatre Vinashanam. Translation Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Having entered the city of Barhismati, in which he had previously lived, Manu entered his palace, which was filled with an atmosphere that eradicated the three miseries of material existence. The material world or material existential life is filled with threefold miseries. Miseries pertaining to the body and mind, miseries pertaining to natural disturbances, and miseries inflicted by other living entities. Human society is meant to create a spiritual atmosphere by spreading the spirit of Krishna consciousness. The miseries of material existence cannot affect the status of Krishna consciousness. It is not that the miseries of the material world completely vanish when one takes to Krishna consciousness, but for one who is Krishna conscious, the miseries of material existence have no effect. We cannot stop the miseries of material atmosphere, but Krishna consciousness is the antiseptic method to protect us from being affected by the miseries of material existence. For a Krishna conscious person, both living in heaven and living in hell are equal. How Swayambhuva Manu created an atmosphere wherein he was not affected by material miseries is explained in the following verses. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurmiltamena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Ihna Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamahyam Pradati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Vidapatakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sakrajatam Sagana Raghunathambitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sagana Lilita Shri Vishakan Vidhamscha Ye Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostude Taptakanchana Gaurangi Ade Vrindavneshwari Vrishabhanusute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kapasnidubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasati Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Moham Karudi Vachalam Pungam Nangai Vekaram Yatkapata Muhammad Shivaram Dhanataram Paramanda Madam Shri Chaitanya Vishram. Hare Krishna. So we see here in this verse how Swayambhuva Manu left his palace. He came to this earthly planet to meet Karta Muni, and after he finished, he was going back to his own palace, which is in Barhismati, in which he was living. So Manu entered his palace, which was filled with an atmosphere that eradicated the threefold miseries of material existence. So we see actually Manu is none other than the direct son of Lord Brahma. And all of these Manus, we have some understanding of these Manus. Swayambhuva Manu had two sons from his wife, Satarupa, that is Uttanapada and Priyavrita. And they were all Manus, his sons, they were all competent rulers of the kingdom. Now, Uttanapada had two wives named Sunitya and Suriji, and through them he had a son called Dhruva. Now, Manu actually is a person from whom we all originate. That's why we call Manu, Manushya. And Manu has actually is a very great devotee of the Lord. Not only they are great devotees of the Lord, they are all well-to-do administrators. That's why they are called Raja Rishis. Raja Rishis means they are all not only able kings who can rule the kingdom, but also Rishis. They were saintly persons. So these are two important qualities that we see in the rulers of the yesteryears. Why? Because here Srila Prabhupada mentions about monarchy, dictatorship, and democracy. Now, if we see those days, people were very happy because those who are ruling the kingdom, Manu or his sons or his grandsons, they were all trained, and the Lord himself actually appointed the positions for the positions of Manu or demigods. It is not that anybody became a leader by voting like we do in a democracy. In a democracy, what we do is we elect somebody, and we try to put, generally people try to put vote for a person through whom they can achieve their sense gratification. But this is not how the kings of the yesteryears were. All these Manus, they were never engaged in any part as sort of a sense gratification. So they could rule the kingdom, and they had a perfect understanding that this creation, entire creation, everything, whatever is there, belongs to the Lord, and they also have to use it in the service of the Lord. That understanding they had, and they were all appointed, and they were also trained in these aspects. So today, if we see, nobody has got a training, but they want to occupy a post. Not only that they want to occupy a post, but generally there may be exceptions. But today's Kshatriyas, or the so-called rulers, they sit in these places for their own sense gratification. Somehow they want to occupy a post, and then they want to remain in that post until the end of their life, only trying to achieve sense gratification. They may be doing something, but then the thing is, generally, it is said that in the scriptures that anyone who thinks or acts in the process of sense gratification, they are doomed. So actually, Srila Prabhupada actually has given a quote how one of the prime ministers had to take birth in a very low species of life somewhere else after leaving the body here. Srila Prabhupada was a great servant of the Lord, and he could foresee as to how these things take place. So when one rules a kingdom without understanding the purpose of sitting in that place and ruling, then what happens is he also suffers. Of course, the citizens also suffer, because when you see today, it's supposed to be a democracy. So, but what happens is that nothing works without paying money anywhere, anything today. Everything is centered only for money. But on the other hand, the citizens are also suffering. They are being exploited, whether children or old age or women. These are all classes who need to be protected by the administrators. But the administrators don't have time. They don't have the proper understanding also, because they have not gone through the Shastras. And earlier days, all these kings used to rule the kingdoms based on the advice of the rishis. And the rishis were all renounced personalities. They never had any attachment to anything in this material world, because they were all renounced. So they could give the right advice, and the rulers also would listen to their advice, take their advice, and then rule the kingdom. So the king was happy. So the king was happy, and the citizens were happy, and they had all had strong faith in the Lord. And so if we see, Manu actually gave what is called the law of mankind, or the law book for mankind. And these books used to be followed over a period of time. But however, as time passed, the kingdom or the rulers, because they were engaged in sense gratification, they left these books and started to rule based on their own whims and fancies. Now, if you take, for example, in Manu Samhita, it's like if somebody steals, his hand is cut off. If somebody brings a living entity into a harm, he is given the same punishment. Now, people might think why this it should be tit for tat, but no. But what used to happen was people used to be afraid of doing anything which is against the law, because they knew that if they do something which is not in the law, they would be punished. So they were all afraid. But today, why people are not afraid? Because they know that if they do something also, if they steal also, they can come out of the jail paying money. And even after coming out of a jail, they may do the same thing and then again go back to jail, spend some time and come back. And somehow they sustain. So this is the difference in a dictatorship and a democracy. So what happens is that here Srila Prabhupada mentions about how Swayambhuva Manu was a great example. Not only he was a great example, but his sons, his grandsons, they were all great examples to the society as a whole, because Lord himself says in Bhagavad Gita, et atara status, as leaders perform, others follow. So when leaders do something, the citizens will also follow. So when leader becomes corrupt, the citizens also become corrupt. And citizens become corrupt, their generations also become corrupt. And when leaders become corrupt, their generation who occupy the throne, I mean, not all the places, but generally we see when this used to be there in the previous time also, the king used to rule, his son used to take the throne, like the Pandavas. We see Pandavas were all great administrators and great rulers, but their generations, when they took up the ruling also, they were ruling based on what their parents were following. So, but now what happens when the leader is corrupt? Their generation who take up the throne also become corrupt. They are not without these qualities. So it is mentioned that great kings, for example, even Swayambhuva Manu, had no desire at all for any sense gratification. And this is the meaning of monarchy. Not monarchy means I can do whatever I want. But there are countries which still have dictatorship, but still they are ruling any day better than what a democracy is, not 100% free of miseries. So this verse actually says that this material world is full of miseries. That is Adhyatmika, Adibhautika, and Adidevika. We come to that. So the king is so trained that he renounces complete sense gratification. And there's also a mention that it's not that because one becomes a king, he should unnecessarily spend money for sense gratification. And as soon as kings become degraded, spending money for sense gratification, they are all lost. So that means if a king spends even a penny out of the money that is collected as tax, all the money comes from citizen only, because the king collects revenue from the citizens, and thereby that is a means by which he is taking a vow to protect the citizens. The king cannot collect just taxes freely. In fact, the law of karma is very, very clear in Manu Samhita that if you take something, you have to pay back something. So that is why even when you see there is a relation between a guru and disciple, a guru gives a lot of instructions, valuable, but the disciple also has to give something called Guru Dakshina. Now, these are not compulsory, they are not compulsory also. One has to give back whatever is there within their capacity. So what Srila Prabhupada is also mentioning that ever since monarchy have been lost, people have created democracy, which is also falling. And now by the laws of nature, the time is coming when dictatorship will put the citizens into more and more difficulty. Why dictatorship will put the citizens into more and more difficulty is because they are not referring to the Shastras, which is Manu Samhita. Following the Manu Samhita will definitely ensure that the government will endure. Swayambhu Manu, for example, he was not only a great example when he was ruling, but he was also a great example after. And I mean, those days the kings did not used to sit in the throne until the last breath, like we see today. But those days they would rule the kingdom, and as soon as the next generation becomes capable, after training, they hand over and they used to go back to the forest, not because for a show business, but to live a life of austerity. And because they were all great devotees of the Lord, they had a proper understanding that when I leave, I should not have any attachment. Because attachment to sense gratification, attachment to I, mine, and all these things keeps one bound in this material world, which is full of miseries. So Manus had this understanding, or even their generations of rulers had all this understanding, and so they would retire at a proper time and enter into the forest. Now, going into forest is not an activity of enjoyment like people these days try to go to the forest to see animals. But no, that's not the purpose of going to forest. The purpose of going to forest was that to renounce this all that is there, because a king has got a lot of opulence and it is not very easy to renounce. So they used to rule for some time and then go back to the forest to renounce, to remember the Lord at the time of leaving their body. So this was the purpose of the going to the forest. And even after going to the forest, they never had a thought that, okay, now I'm feeling bad without the opulence, I should go back to the palace. No, they all remained there and they would wind up their pastimes there. So this is how the rulers were ruling. And Manu actually, he gives some valuable instructions before leaving to his sons. He says, it is said that he gave these instructions not only for his sons or grandsons, but for all of human society. He has given these instructions. And what instruction he gives? All the property belongs to the Supreme. Since all the property belongs to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, everything should be offered to the Lord, and we should take only prasada. Prasada means it is not only the prasadam that we honor or eat, but also everything should be looked at and taken as a prasada. That means after offering to the Lord, we should not fight amongst ourselves to take more than we need. So this is a very classic thing of how one should live in this life. And there's a similar instructions where Maharaja Yudhishthira, this is from Narad Muni, this is mentioned in the 7th canto. He says that one may claim proprietorship to as much wealth as required to maintain the body and soul. That means we must use only what is required to maintain the body and soul together. But one who desires proprietorship over more than that must be considered a thief, and he deserves to be punished by the laws of nature. So this is how, even if one uses something beyond what is required, he has to be punished by the laws of nature. And that punishment comes none other than the books given by Manu Samhita. Of course, now people might think, what is there if I don't forget the law, if I don't obey the law? But the Lord is seated as the super soul, and he watches every act, every thought that is there in our mind, that also the super soul watches, and he gives us punishment through his agent, who is none other than Yamaraj. And then in one of the slokas, in the 7th canto, it is mentioned, if by chance we get an abundance of money, we should always consider that it belongs to the personality, Supreme Personality of Godhead, and we should utilize it in the service of the Lord, not for accumulating and keeping a bank and earning bank interest or deposit. So that is how Manu was a perfect example to the whole world. And everyone, even today, they are all none other than descendants of Manu. So when we call a descendant, it means that we have originated from, for example, we have come from our fathers have come from grandfathers. Similarly, our origin is from Manu. And there are 14 such Manus who live in one day of Brahma. And one Manu's, this thing is like one cycle of Satya, Treta Yuga, Dwapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga. It constitutes 1 millennium. Like that, period of Manu, it comes to something like 43,20,071. So it runs into millions of years. You can imagine how long these Manus used to live and used to rule the kingdom. And if after ruling for such a long time, if they have to renounce at a right time and go to the forest, it's not very easy, because having so much of opulence. You see, today, for example, even in a democracy, somebody may be elected as a chief minister or a minister or a prime minister or a president. For 5 years, if they stay, and beyond 5 years, if they have been asked to leave, they will not like leave. So imagine the lifespan of Manu and how they used to renounce, or even when they live, how they used to live. It's a perfect example. For example, Swayambhu Manu, it is mentioned in the forthcoming verses, how in the morning, not only he, Swayambhu Manu, but his whole family, with wife, children and all, they would wake up in the morning. When they wake up, there used to be professional singers who don't sing classic music, or who don't sing film music or drama. They listen to the glories of the Supreme Lord. That is how they wake up. And when they wake up, if they are hearing the glories of the Lord, what happens is that they are engaged in the consciousness of Supreme Personality of Godhead. And even while going to the bed, they, as a family, they go to bed hearing the glories of the Lord. That means they were engaged all the time in the process of hearing and chanting, hearing and chanting, hearing and chanting, which means that all the time they were engaged in the service of the Lord. If someone is engaged all the time in the service of the Lord, he becomes free from the desire for sense gratification, because he has got the right understanding. So they were able to rule, and when, as per the law books, and because they were able to rule, they were happy, and the citizens were happy, and the citizens were feeling protected. There is a mention in the Srimad Bhagavatam how Swayambhu Manu, although his duration of life came to an end, very long life consisting of a manvantara. Manvantara means his lifespan of a Manu. His life was not spent in vain, since he was ever engaged in hearing, contemplating, writing down, and chanting the pastimes of the Lord. So the process starts with hearing, chanting, writing the pastimes of the Lord, with which one is always engaged in. Example is given just as when there is a fleshly prepared food, then it becomes very, very tasty. But after 3 or 4 hours or 5 hours, it becomes stale. One does not like to taste a food which is 3, 4, 5 years, 5 hours old. Similarly, when one is engaged in Krishna consciousness, or when one is engaged in the devotional service to the Lord, his life is as good as fresh. Srila Prabhupada actually mentions in this purport that material miseries are there. It cannot vanish. It is there. When we are in the material world, these miseries will continue. But then one, by practicing this devotional service, takes what is called a protection in the form of an antiseptic. Normally we see how these days we take an antiseptic. For example, if there is an epidemic of, say, smallpox or chickenpox, children are given antiseptic injections to take as prevention. Similarly, Krishna consciousness is like taking an antiseptic by which the devotees are not affected. They feel, okay, I'm bound to suffer for this. I'm taking it as a part of my karma, and they leave it. But a materialist cannot think on these lines. They always think, try to find ways and means. That is an example that is given, how we use our intelligence. For example, we might see that, okay, today commuting is a problem, so I may buy a car. So with our intelligence, we might think that, okay, I will buy a car today and that will solve my transportation problem. But along with that buying a car comes other problems like maintaining the car. These days it is not very easy. And then comes the problem of driving the car in traffic and spending hours together in traffic. So we add one asset to our this thing for to solve one problem, but then what has happened is we have added other problems related to it in course of that adding that one problem in our life. So if you look at everything that is there in the world today, mankind is suffering. Why? Because they have forgotten their relationship with the Lord. Whereas in the earlier years, even the rulers were so very capable, they could adjust the weather, because when they were ruling the kingdom as per the laws of this God, then the Lord himself being pleased would arrange everything in such a way that there is no scarcity for the rulers. So the rulers didn't have a problem. They used to, uh, uh, there are instances given in Srimad Bhagavatam, how even the Pandavas were very great rulers and they could adjust many things because they were all great devotees of the Lord. So these rulers, they could manage even a weather or anything that was required so that the citizens are protected. And Swayambhuva Madhu was a perfect example of that. When he heard something about the glories of the Lord, he meditated upon that. So one of the points that is mentioned is they were writing about the glories of the Lord. So writing something that we are hearing is a process by which we remember what we have heard. When we write repeatedly, then we remember, yes, this is what I have heard. So these manus, the duration is mentioned as 1000 yuga cycles. That is called one kalpa. So like that, 1000 yuga cycles is one kalpa. That means one cycle of Satya, Treta, Dwapara is one cycle. Like that, they had 1000 yuga cycles, which compiles one kalpa. Like this, there are 71 times they used to rule. This is one point I had. And another important point is that Indra, now, for example, all the positions like Indra, the demigods, all of them are appointed by the personality of Godhead himself and none other than him. So this is how they were appointed and placed in their respective positions based on their qualification. And not only that, they were all placed based on that certain amount of training. But if you see, even there's so much of mention in the Srimad Bhagavatam how the most important person in who is worried in the material world is none other than King Indra. Indra is the king of heavenly planets. And anytime when any saintly person performs a tapasya, the first person to be worried is Indra, who is the king of heaven, because he thinks that somebody may come and occupy his post. So this is the fear that exists even in the material world, even in the higher planetary systems also. Now, coming to the miseries in this material world, even on the higher planets, what happens is that whatever we see, it is our vision or our understanding is limited to this material world. That is what the earthly planet that we are living. But this existence of these threefold miseries is there all the way up to Brahmaloka also. There are many examples. We'll understand from some of these examples. Bali Maharaj, he had conquered everything all the way up to the heavenly planets. But finally, when the Lord came as Vamanadev, he surrendered everything. And one of the slokas, he says, what is this use of home, country, community, etc.? Attachment for them merely wastes the valuable energy of one's lifetime. See, now what happens, it is not very easy to accumulate whatever one desires. One has to put a lot of efforts, a lot of hard work. And then Imagine a situation like Bali Maharaj. After all that what he got, he had to give up everything because he at least he realized that he has to surrender to Vamanadev. So at that time he says attachment for them merely wastes the valuable energy of one's lifetime. So one's whole lifetime one spends accumulating. But what happens? The Lord comes as death and takes away everything. Here, the Lord personally came and took away all his possessions. But what is the example we have to learn from that is that the Lord comes to us as death or in the form of material miseries and take away everything from us. I want to skip a few things for short of time. Now, there's a mention of how we take interest in society, friendship, and etc. What are they? They are all merely sources of plundering whatever we have. All that we have is taken away by the society or by our friends or by our relatives. And if not us, then the government takes it off. So if you have earned some accumulated by an illegal means, then what happens is that they are taken away by the government also. So this is how the human life is going on in the material world. But human life is not meant for sense gratification, but for actually self-realization and not for accumulating unwanted things. Whereas all these so-called family, society, circle, they all are ones who plunder whatever we have. Now there is a quote on the heavenly planets. Now the heavenly planets, it is said that they are thousands of times more opulent than the lower planetary systems. And who is the architect? Vishwakarma. He is known as a heavenly architect. Now imagine in this world itself, if we go to a very rich man and talk to him about Krishna consciousness, he may not be interested because he thinks, well, why should I bother about it? So if you understand from this, that somebody staying in the heavenly planets has got 1,000 times more opulence than what is there in this earthly planet. So how would he react if he has to leave his palace? No, it's not like very easy. And we see here, Swayambhu Manu left his palace and came to earth to meet Kardamuni. Kardamuni was a saintly person, pronounced person. And after that, he goes back, he didn't feel the difference of going back because whether here or there, for him it is the same because even he was a person who was self-realized. He could understand that whether here or there, it is the same matter. So Srila Prabhupada mentions, heaven or hell doesn't make any difference for a devotee because he's not affected by that. Whereas in a heaven, so many upper planetary systems are there. And of course, there are not only the upper planetary systems are there, but there are also Vedic literatures. And the opulence of those planets is that the walls, everything are made of gems, gold, etc. They were very attractive. And everyone there, living beings, they are all very beautiful. They are not only different types of human beings, but they also mentioned that there are animals, lions, elephants, all of these are also found in the heavenly planets. And mountains are filled with pure water which is very clear and crystal clear, no contamination. So this is how the opulence in the higher planetary systems are. And also not that the heavenly damsels, which we call as apsaras, they are all used as prostitutes on the heavenly planets. So whatever we see here, it is all a small fragment of what is there existing in the higher planetary systems. In the 8th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, there is a mention of how, normally when we perform a sacrifice, a householder normally performs sacrifices to achieve the heavenly planets. Because general understanding is by performing this, I can achieve something better, at least my next life. But That sacrificial fire is none other than the mouth of Vishnu. And the purport it is mentioned that all these things are offered like grains, ghee, fruits, flowers, so that Lord Vishnu be satisfied. So what happens when these items are offered in the sacrificial fire? Lord Vishnu, when he is satisfied, then after that, after he is satisfied, the prasadam is given to the brahmanas. Therefore, when these are offered by such activities, a householder can be maybe elevated to the heavenly planets and similar places in the higher planetary systems. So that means not only by doing this, they are going to the higher planetary system, but what would happen is these whatever grains that they are offering, they also come back after their karma is over. That means they are offering something to the Vishnu, but it is used as a karma kanda activity. So after the activity is offered, even they get the benefit of being there in the heavenly planets in some other form, maybe in the form of a grain, which we don't know. But then there also what happens is it stays for some time and come back to this earthly planet in the form of grains. So this is how everything that is there, all the living entities, animate, inanimate, they live for some time, may go to the higher planetary systems or go to the hellish planets, depending upon how it is used, and come back to this earthly planet. There is one more example given of the effect of, like we see normally, there are so many living entities who fight, kings fight, but the kings in the dominating planets, like the sun and the moon, they also have enemies. See, we have so many enemies here, but the planets like dominating planets like sun and moon, they also have enemies like Rahu. So because of occasional attack upon the sun and the moon by Rahu, we see that eclipses take place. So the fightings of demons and the demigods also virtually takes place at the higher planets. It cannot be stopped. But what happens is that those who are devotees of the Lord, they take it in the right spirit. Another example that is given is that we try to go by artificial means. Like if we see people trying to go to the moon, trying to explore the earthly living beings and other planetary systems and all. But there's mentioned the 8th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, how those who try to ascend to the upper planetary systems are pushed by Indra to back to the earth. So even if somebody tries to go, they are pushed back forcibly, they have to come back. They cannot stay there just because something is much more pleasurable there. So Lord himself says in Bhagavad Gita, Urdhvam gacchati sattasta. That means those who are in the mode of goodness can go to the upper planets. Those in the mode of darkness and passion, however, are not allowed to enter the higher planets. So the thing is that even if we artificially try to go somewhere, we cannot make an entry there. You will be pushed down here. Now, examples of good rulers are given by, like for example, in the Srimad Bhagavatam 9th canto mention of Maharaja Ambrisha. They were all accustomed to chanting and hearing about the glorious activities of the Lord. So they were never had an aspiration to be elevated to the heavenly planets, which are extremely dear to the demigods. That means the demigods who are there in the higher planets, when they rule for a long time, they also become attached to that. But rulers of the kingdom here, they never had an attachment because they were always hearing about the glories of the Lord, and they were always engaged in Krishna consciousness. And even if by chance, if a devotee has to go through, why devotees go through, sometimes examples are given, but the reason is given here in the 6th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Devotees solely engage in the devotion service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Narayana, never fear any condition of life. The heavenly planets, liberation, or hellish planet, they are all the same for a devotee. Why? Because a devotee does not desire anything for his own self. He is known as a akama or desireless devotee, because his only business is to render service to the Lord. And because examples like Maharaja Ambrisha, they were all exalted devotees. They trained their subjects in a way that the citizens were not interested in anything material, even including happiness in the heavenly planets. So even during those times, the citizens were also trained. Because they were trained, the citizens were also trained not to engage in sense gratification. Lot of examples in seventh canto also of how opulent even Hiranyakashipu was when he was in the heavenly planets. That everything that one desires, it is available immediately. So that is why it is given the fifth canto that this material world is nothing but a great forest of enjoyment. That means it looks like a very attractive forest, whether here or in the higher planets. But then what happens is that when one goes to the higher planets also, when the results are over, he has to come down to the lower planetary system, by which one is always entangled. There is a quote in the fifth canto where Sukadeva Goswami is telling Parikshit Maharaj. He says, in the province of Emerald, there are hundreds and thousands of hellish planets. The impious people I have mentioned, and also those I have not mentioned, must all enter those various planets according to the degree of impiety. And those who are pious, however, enter other planetary systems, namely the planets of the demigods. Nevertheless, both the pious and the impious are again brought to earth after the results of their pious or impious acts are exhausted. That means everything that happens in the material world happens either by once performing a pious activity or once performing an impious activity. You perform a pious activity, you go to heaven. And if you perform a impious activity, you go to hell. But after the results of these activities are over, whether you are in heaven or you are in hell, you come back to this earthly planet. And once these results are over, when you come, again you take the same cycle of birth and death, whether from here or there. And there's a mention in the Bhagavad Gita, Brahma Bhuvana Loka Purna Avartina Arjuna, where the Lord says, even if one goes to Brahma Loka, which is one of the topmost planet, one must return to this earthly planet. So the question is, how for a Krishna conscious person, how does he take it? Whether he is in heaven or hell, he is always a devotee of the Lord, practicing devotional service. He is not affected by it, by these threefold miseries of Adhyatmika. Adhyatmika is disturbances caused in the mind. Adi Bhautika is the disturbances caused by other living entities. And Adi Devika is the disturbances caused by heavenly living entities. So we see if there suddenly, we see now the weather in Bangalore has become very cold. It's something that is created by the Adi Devika. And if we see how Adi Bhautika is happening, we might go out and all of a sudden see that somebody has stolen our purse or something has happened. So these are all disturbances that are caused by other living entities in the place where we stay. And Adhyatmika is disturbances that are caused by the body and mind. We are always disturbed, particularly Kali Yuga is nothing but disturbances in our mind. So all these three disturbances, Adhyatmika, Adi Bhautika or Adi Devika, they exist not only here, they exist all the way, even up to the heavenly planets. But one who practices devotional service, for him, heaven or hell, they are all same. One example is of how King Chitraketu, he was cursed by Mother Parvati to go to hell, because Chitraketu was going and passing by when Lord Shiva and Parvati were sitting in an embracing position. He laughed at them. So seeing this, Parvati Devi got angry and she cursed that since he laughed at them, he goes to hell. But Chitraketu, how was not at all. Everyone in human society enjoys happiness and distress according to his past deeds, and this way he travels in the material world. Therefore, no one is responsible for his happiness and distress. One is controlled by the influence of material nature in the material world. Yet one thinks himself to be the doer of everything. That means he says that in this material world, which is made of the external energy, sometimes someone is favored and sometimes somebody is suffering due to the situations, but because they are within this material world, and none of these positions have any factual existence. That means if we see something very, very attractive, it does not have a true existence in this material world. At the same time, if we see something that is not very attractive, that is also not having a reality in this material world. And he says that after he left, Chitraketu actually took the curse in his positive way, and Lord Shiva finally told Parvati, how great Vaishnava is, because being servants of the personality of Godhead, they are great souls and are not interested in any kind of material happiness. Because Lord Shiva thought that even if a person like Chitraketu is cursed, he doesn't take it in a very, like in our case, if somebody does something, immediately we have a vengeful attitude. But Chitraketu was a different personality. He didn't take it as this thing, rather he took it as a blessing from the Lord himself. Because for a devotee, heaven or hell is the same. Yeah, there's a quote where he says, devotees solely engaged in the devotion service of the personality of Godhead Narayana never fear any condition of life. For them, heavenly planets, liberation, and the hellish planets are all the same. For such devotees are interested only in the service of the Lord. So those who are devotees, they are not bothered. Whatever condition they are there, heaven or hell, for them it is the same, because they're always engaged in the service of the Lord. So the point is that all these miseries exist in this material world, and one cannot be free whether he is in the lower planet or upper planet or a higher planet. So miseries exist, but a Krishna conscious person is not affected, because he is created an atmosphere like Swayambhu Manu created in his palace. He has created an atmosphere where he is always protected by the Lord, because he is always engaged in glorifying the Lord. So this is all I have in the class for today. For the next few minutes, I can take any questions, any comments.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Donat Pranam Prabhuji.
Donat Pranam.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, thank you.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. Thank you, Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dhanwar Pranam Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. Donat Pranam.
हरे कृष्ण प्रभु जी, मैं राहुल बोल रहा हूँ. हरे कृष्ण.
Hare Krishna. Yes, Mataji, you have any questions?
नहीं प्रभु जी.
Okay.
मेरा बेटा बोल रहा प्रभु जी.
हाँ, वही.
हाँ, वो हमको समझाया कि भगवान हमारे हमेशा साथ रहते हैं, बोल रहा है. प्रभु जी बता रहे हैं, राहुल बोला.
Very good, very good. He has got a very good understanding at this age. Definitely, I'm very happy, because this is the right age to take up and devotion service, for which he's got the right understanding. I appreciate that. As long as you're protected by the Lord, you don't have anything to worry about.
Thank you, Prabhu ji. Hare Krishna. Dhanwar Pranam Prabhu ji.
Hare Krishna. Dhanwar Pranam. So thank you all very much. Grantha Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Thank you,
Very
Prabhuji.
well analyzed,
Thank you.
Prabhuji. Dhanyavad. Very well analyzed, Prabhuji,
Thank you.
about the leadership qualities with the divinity and sincerity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mataji. Thank you, Mataji.